I said you're nothing but dead weight, the words still echo in my mind. The moment a son's cruelty cut deeper than any wound. To be caged like an animal by the very blood you once nurtured is a betrayal that leaves scars no time can erase. From that instant, I knew the line between love and cruelty had been shattered forever. This isn't just a story about losing a home, it's about reclaiming dignity when the people closest to you strip it away. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Flagstaff sits high in the mountains of northern Arizona, a town where the air is thin. The mornings bite with cold, and the wind whistles through the pine trees with a sharpness that reminds you how small you really are. For most people, it is a place to pass through on the way to the Grand Canyon, but for me, it became the last stop in a long life of labor. I had spent my years in the dry heat of Phoenix working on air conditioners and heating units, saving every penny I could while raising my boy. When I turned 62, I thought maybe I could slow down. But life has a way of making you pay interest on every dream you ever dared to have. My name is Walter Briggs. I am not remarkable, except for the miles etched into my body. My hands are nicked and scarred from decades of turning wrenches and tightening bolts. My back reminds me every morning that I once carried units too heavy for one man, but had no one to help. I am the sort of man people pass by in diners or hardware stores without notice, but in my own quiet way, I have always mattered. I mattered to my son, or at least I thought I did. When my wife Linda died, Tyler was just 13. That boy looked at me with hollow eyes, and I swore he would never feel abandoned. I picked up every job that came my way. Mornings crawling through attics fixing AC ducts, nights teaching HVAC basics at the trade school, weekends patching roofs or repairing heaters. My shoes wore thin, my jeans faded, but I made sure Tyler's shoes were new and his backpack held fresh books. When other fathers were coaching baseball, I was scrubbing grease off my hands under a fluorescent light. I thought it was worth it. The years turned like gears in a machine, grinding but steady. Tyler graduated high school with decent grades, then college, his tuition paid in full from the hours I traded with my body. I imagined the day he would look back and see me not as the man in coveralls with sore knees, but as the father who never let him go without. I thought maybe one day he would carry me the way I carried him. When Tyler married Madison, I wanted him to begin life free of the weights I had known. I gave them the house in Cedar Ridge, newly built with my life savings. I did not tell him the deed still carried my name. My financial advisor had said to wait until Tyler settled his taxes and career. To me, it seemed unnecessary, almost insulting, to think about legal protections against my own blood. He was my son. What could I possibly need protection from? I moved into the small ground floor bedroom, leaving the master suite to the young couple. I cooked my own meals, cleaned my own corner of the house, and kept out of their way. I thought giving space was the respectful thing, the way to let their marriage breathe. I lived simply, black coffee in the morning, tinkering with my tools in the shed, spending time with the rescue dogs at the shelter nearby. On weekends, I helped the Connors next door fix their gate or replace a leaky faucet. I stayed useful because usefulness had always been my armor. The house itself seemed to remember Linda better than Tyler did. She had hung a wind chime on the front porch years ago, and every time the mountain breeze shook it, I felt her presence brushing against me. The sound was light, almost delicate, and it carried me back to dinners where laughter filled the table instead of silence. Now it was the only music left in a home that was supposed to be warm. At night, I sat in my chair by the window, listening to the distant whistle of the freight trains as they crossed the valley. The sound mingled with the groan of the pine trees and the faint clang of the wind chime, creating a kind of melancholy symphony. I told myself that as long as Tyler and Madison had stability, my own discomfort didn't matter. Sacrifice was second nature by then, and I believed blood was thicker than distance. But love does not always return in equal measure. I did not yet know how fragile that bond had become, how quickly gratitude can evaporate into irritation. I believed the house was still a sanctuary, a place of shared memories and respect. I had no reason to think otherwise. I held to the idea that a father's sacrifice would always be honored. I see now how naive that was. A house is only safe when love lives inside it. Bricks and beams do not hold families together. Hearts do. And though the wind chimes still sang for Linda, the warmth that once defined our family was already fading. It slipped away quietly, like a draft under a closed door, until only the cold was left. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of how quickly peace can turn into quiet suffering, drop a comment with number 1 so I know you're walking through this moment with me. The change did not happen all at once. It came quietly, slipping in through the seams of daily life, until I could hardly remember when the tone of the house had shifted. Tyler used to thank me for the smallest things: a ride to work, a repaired faucet, a meal on the table. That gratitude had dried up, leaving behind only clipped remarks and impatient sighs. Madison, once polite, began to lace her words with the kind of humor that is not really humor at all. One morning as I poured my coffee, I found her note propped against the pot. Cut your showers to 5 minutes. Save money for everyone. The handwriting was neat, almost cheerful, but the words struck me with a bluntness that lingered all day. I folded the note carefully, slid it into my pocket, and left for work without mentioning it. On the drive to my part-time job, I told myself it was nothing more than a young couple worrying about bills. Still, it sat heavy in my chest like an unwelcome stone. The little things piled up quickly. Tyler became obsessed with the thermostat, setting it to 65 degrees at night and locking the digital controls with a code I didn't know. When I asked about it once, he said sharply, "Energy isn't free, Dad." I didn't argue. I put on another sweater, wrapped myself in an old quilt, and tried to believe he was only tired from work. Dinner, once the one ritual that brought us together, began to split apart. Tyler and Madison would carry their plates to the living room, turning on the television while I sat alone in the kitchen. The clink of their forks reached me from the other side of the wall, muffled and distant, as if I were already a guest overstaying my welcome. My own meals grew simpler: soup from a can, bread I baked myself, a cup of black coffee to chase the emptiness. Sometimes at night, as I passed their closed bedroom door, I heard whispers that stopped the moment my footsteps creaked the floorboards. I caught fragments. Madison urging Tyler to set rules, Tyler muttering that I still acted as if the house were mine. Those half-heard words hurt worse than outright shouting. They told me everything without saying anything. I tried to dismiss the unease, but it lingered. I found myself lying awake staring at the ceiling, the wind outside rattling Linda's old chime on the porch. Its delicate ringing contrasted cruelly with the sharp tones that now filled my days. That chime had once been a promise of home. Now it sounded more like a warning, reminding me of the distance growing between me and the people I had sacrificed my life for. Still, I made excuses for them. I told myself Tyler was stressed, that Madison was adjusting to having me under the same roof. I convinced myself that if I remained quiet, if I stayed out of their way, things would settle back into peace. After all, hadn't I built my whole life on patience? Patience had carried me through years of single fatherhood, nights without sleep, double shifts, and endless bills. Surely it could carry me through this. Yet each day brought a new reminder that I was no longer seen as father or family, but as a burden to be managed. Tyler's irritation surfaced in small commands. Turn off the light when you're done. Don't leave your shoes by the door. Stop buying so much milk. I obeyed without complaint, but inside me something began to fray. The worst part was the silence. When I walked into a room, conversations stopped. When I asked a question, answers came short and flat. The warmth that should live between a father and son had cooled to something brittle. I felt it every time I saw Tyler's eyes glaze over as I spoke, as if I were nothing more than background noise. One night, I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the freight train lights cut across the valley, and admitted what I had been avoiding. This was no longer my home. It might be the house I bought, the place I had dreamed would hold family gatherings and laughter, but it was no longer safe with me inside it. I did not yet know what Tyler was capable of. I told myself he would never cross a line, that blood was stronger than frustration. But as I turned away from the window, the cold of the room wrapping around me, I felt the fragile truth pressing in. Respect had already begun to slip away, replaced by control, and once control takes root, love becomes a shadow. If you're still watching and sensing how a small crack can grow into something much darker, type number 2 in the comments to let me know you feel the tension building. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night when fatigue drapes over your shoulders like a wet coat. I had spent the day outside repairing a stubborn cooling unit for a ranch house. The wind had whipped through the pine trees, cutting against my knuckles until they cracked. My back throbbed, my knees burned, and all I wanted was 10 minutes of hot water to loosen the ache. I told myself it was a small reward, the kind of comfort an old man should be allowed to claim without apology. Steam soon filled the bathroom, clouding the mirror. I leaned against the tiled wall, closing my eyes as the heat sank into my muscles. For the first time all week, I felt the weight lifting, if only for a moment. That's when the pounding began. The first knock was firm, impatient. The second was a fist hammering against wood. Tyler's voice followed, sharp enough to pierce through the hiss of the shower. "How long are you going to be in there? You're wasting all the hot water." I tried to steady my voice. 2 more minutes, that's all I need." My words were calm, almost pleading, but they only seemed to ignite him further. "You think money grows on trees? You don't respect anyone else in this house," he shouted. The contempt in his tone stung worse than the cold winds outside. The pounding stopped. I thought maybe he had walked away to cool down, that the storm would pass. But then I heard the sliding door to the backyard open, the distinct squeal of hinges I had meant to oil weeks before. A metallic clink followed, the sound of the kennel lock. When I stepped out of the bathroom, towel around my shoulders, Tyler was waiting. His face was stone, his eyes narrowed in a way I had never seen before. No warmth, no trace of the boy I had raised, only something hard and foreign. "Come on," he said flatly. He seized my wrist with a grip stronger than I expected and dragged me down the hall. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet, the towel slipping as we moved through the living room and out to the back door. "Tyler, what are you doing?" I asked, struggling against his hold. He didn't answer. The air outside bit into my damp skin as he pulled me across the yard toward the kennel. The cage loomed in the dark, a structure I had built years earlier for the dogs we fostered. Its wire walls had always seemed sturdy, protective. Now they looked like prison bars. Before I could resist, he shoved me inside. The latch clicked, followed by the high-pitched beep of the smart lock controlled from his phone. At first, I stood frozen, gripping the cold metal with trembling hands. "This isn't funny, Tyler. Let me out!" My voice cracked. He turned his back and walked toward the house without a word. The door slid shut. Moments later, the sound of the television swelled, laughter from a sitcom spilling into the night air. Inside, they were eating dinner, while I stood barefoot on the concrete floor of a kennel, wet and shivering. The first hour, I told myself it was a cruel prank. He would come back, apologize, maybe laugh nervously at his own stupidity. But the hours dragged on, and the realization grew heavier. This was not a joke. This was punishment. This was humiliation. The night air dropped quickly in the high country. By midnight, it hovered near 40 degrees. I curled into myself on the ground, wrapping the towel around my shoulders as best I could. Every gust of wind rattled the wire mesh, cutting deeper into my skin. My teeth chattered so loudly, I wondered if they could hear me inside. When dawn finally broke, the light revealed my shame more clearly than the dark had. My joints were stiff, my throat dry. Madison came out with a scoop of kibble for the dogs. Her eyes flicked to me for the briefest second. She didn't gasp, didn't look horrified, didn't even look surprised. She simply turned away, her silence louder than any insult. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a burst of anger from a tired son. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, cold, and sanctioned by both of them. The kennel wasn't just meant to hold me, it was meant to show me my place. As the sun climbed higher, I sat against the wire, shivering, watching the house that bore my name. For decades, I had seen it as a fortress of family, a testament to sacrifice and love. Now it was nothing more than a shell. Respect had died here. In its place grew something far darker: control. And I knew, as I clutched the towel tighter around me, that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. If you're still watching and realizing how betrayal can hide in plain sight until it cuts deep, leave number 3 below to let me know you're still with me. The second morning in the kennel came with an ache that spread through every joint of my body. My back felt like it had been pressed against stone all night, and my legs cramped from being folded against the wire mesh. The towel I had wrapped around myself was damp with dew, heavy and useless. I pushed myself upright slowly, gripping the cold bars for balance, my breath hanging in white puffs in the early mountain air. I told myself I had to try. I pressed my fingers against the hinges, feeling for weakness, scraping my knuckles raw as I pulled. The bolts were rusted, but not enough to break with the strength of tired hands. I fished through my pocket and found a coin I'd forgotten about, its edge worn smooth. Desperation made me think it might work as a makeshift screwdriver. I pressed it into the screws, twisting until my fingertips bled, but the metal didn't budge. Above me, the small black box of the smart lock blinked faintly. I shoved at the door again. The lock beeped, a high-pitched mocking sound, as if reminding me that control belonged to Tyler's phone, not my will. I called out toward the house. "Tyler, enough! Let me out!" Silence. Then the sound of the television turned louder, laughter spilling across the yard, muffling my voice. I tried again, louder, my throat burning. The only reply was the slam of the sliding glass door and the muffled cadence of his footsteps fading away. By mid-morning, Madison came out to feed the dogs. She carried a bucket of kibble, scattering it across metal bowls with practiced indifference. She glanced toward me once, her eyes sliding over my shivering frame, as if I were no more than another animal behind the wire. She said nothing. She did not even pause. That silence sliced deeper than anger. It told me clearly, this wasn't just Tyler's cruelty. She approved. The sun rose higher, but warmth never seemed to reach me. My lips cracked, my stomach twisted with hunger, and thirst gnawed at me worse than either. I crawled toward the hose that leaked near the garden and pressed my lips to the trickle of water, swallowing the metallic taste as if it were a feast. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and whispered to myself words Linda had once told me. "Don't cry when you're humiliated. Remember it instead." I let the memory harden me. That night, the temperature dropped again. I curled on the concrete, arms wrapped around my chest, every breath a struggle. Yet despair didn't crush me. Something else was forming inside, slow and sharp. Anger, but not the wild kind that makes you shout and pound your fists. This was colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. I began to understand that begging would change nothing. If I cried out, if I pleaded, I would only prove to them that they were in control. So I stayed silent. I listened to the wind rattle the mesh, listened to the dogs snoring in their crates nearby, listened to my own breath steady into a rhythm of endurance. The real battle was not against the lock. It was against surrender. On the third morning, Tyler finally opened the kennel. The beep of the lock sounded again, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was liberating. He muttered, "Don't waste water again," and walked away without looking at me. I stepped out slowly, every muscle stiff, but I didn't answer. I didn't give him a single word. I walked to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed until the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. Later that day, as I passed the small office that had once been Linda's sewing room, I noticed the printer blinking. A sheet of paper had slid out halfway, stuck. I pulled it free, expecting to see a bill or a letter. Instead, my name stared back at me in shaky, forged handwriting, a draft of a power of attorney, the signature a poor imitation of my own. Scattered on the desk were other copies, some crumpled, some still half-typed. In the margin, written in Madison's neat script, were the words, "If he won't transfer the deed, use this for HELOC." I folded one page quickly, slipped it into my pocket, and walked away without a sound. My chest burned, not from fear this time, but from clarity. The kennel had been humiliation, yes, but this was proof of something darker. They weren't just angry. They were planning to erase me completely, to take what I had built, what I had sacrificed decades for. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew the truth. The cage had not been the end. It had only been the beginning. If you're still watching and seeing how every failed attempt only pushes the pain further, comment number 4, so I know you haven't looked away. The cage had left its mark on me, but not the way Tyler intended. My body was sore, yes, but it was my mind that had shifted. The humiliation had hardened into resolve. I no longer wasted breath on arguments or raised my voice in desperation. Instead, I moved quietly, every step deliberate, every thought sharpened. The first thing I did was pull the old safe from the corner of my room. It had been Linda's idea to keep everything important in one place: birth certificates, bank statements, the house deed. My hands trembled only slightly as I turned the dial and opened it. Inside, the yellowing paper carried my name in bold letters: Walter Harrison, sole owner of the property. That single document was stronger than any lock Tyler could snap shut on a kennel door. I tucked the deed into a folder and made a call I hadn't thought I'd ever need to make. Nora Holloway, an attorney I had once fixed a leaking water heater for, answered after 2 rings. "Walter, it's been a while." "It has," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I need your help, and I need you to keep this between us." She listened as I told her the truth, not sparing the details: the kennel, the locked door, the forged paperwork I had found in the printer. She didn't gasp or try to comfort me. She just asked for facts, documents, proof. I respected her for that. "Walter," she said finally, "if we go through with this, it will burn every bridge you still have with your son. You need to understand what that means." I swallowed hard, but my answer was steady. They burned those bridges the day they locked me away. All I'm doing now is making sure they don't take the ashes too. Over the next days, Nora laid out the plan. Confirm ownership, line up a private cash buyer, no public listing, no word to neighbors. Everything would pass through escrow fast and quiet. The fewer eyes on the deal, the less chance Tyler would know what was coming. She would also secure a new bank account in my name only, one Tyler couldn't touch. By the end of our call, the path was clear. Back at home, I lived behind a mask. At dinner one night, Tyler bragged about remodeling the kitchen, waving his fork like a man already tearing down walls. Madison leaned into him, laughing, talking about how the new countertops would look. I sat across from them quietly, chewing my food, nodding when expected. They didn't notice the folder tucked deep in my nightstand. They didn't notice the steel in my silence. That evening, while they slept, I walked down the hallway and retrieved the small doorbell camera I had once unhooked at Tyler's insistence. Linda had always insisted on keeping it, for safety. I reinstalled it, slotted in one of the old memory cards, and sifted through the recordings on my laptop. There it was, clear as day. The night Tyler dragged me across the yard, shoved me into the kennel, and locked the door with a flick of his phone. My voice on the recording, calm, pleading. His response, silence, then the sharp click of the lock. The grainy video didn't need polishing. It was enough to prove elder abuse, enough to strip away any pretense if he dared to fight me later. I didn't show it to him, not yet. Instead, I placed a copy in a sealed envelope and drove it to Nora's office the next morning. "If he tries to contest the sale, use this," I told her. She nodded, her eyes scanning the screen before sliding it back into its case. "This is more than enough." That night, as Tyler strutted around the living room with a beer in his hand, lecturing me about the rising electricity bill, I watched him with a different gaze. I no longer saw a son who might come around or a man whose respect I could earn back. I saw someone living in a world of illusions, illusions I was preparing to shatter. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply sat there, my hands folded, letting him believe he still held control. But deep down, I knew the truth. The war he thought he was winning had already ended. He just hadn't realized yet that the battle lines were drawn against him. The deed was secure. The lawyer was engaged. The evidence of his cruelty was preserved. The conflict that had started with whispers and small humiliations had erupted into open war. And for the first time, I wasn't the prisoner. I was the man holding the key. The morning light crept through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the folder that sat heavy on my lap. I hadn't slept. Instead, I sat in my chair by the window, turning the deed over in my hands again and again. Every time I read my name printed at the top, I felt the same truth pressed deeper into me. This house was mine. But the more important truth was this: staying here meant surrendering every shred of dignity I had left. I thought of Tyler as a boy, the way he used to ride on my shoulders through county fairs, his laughter bright in the summer air. I remembered his small hand clutching mine when we stood at his mother's grave, promising myself I'd never let him feel alone. I saw him in his cap and gown, walking across the stage to grab his diploma, unaware that the money behind his education came from nights I spent bent over a mop or fixing broken pipes in drafty basements. I had given him everything I had, and he had returned the favor by locking me in a cage like a stray mutt. The weight of that memory burned behind my eyes. It wasn't just the act itself, it was what it meant. Blood, sacrifice, and decades of loyalty had meant nothing. If my own son could see me as a nuisance, as something to control or discard, then family was no shield. That was the hardest truth to face. Blood didn't excuse betrayal. I stared at the suitcase propped against the wall. I hadn't filled it yet, but in my mind I knew what would go inside. Passport, bank documents, the deed, cash I had withdrawn in small amounts so Tyler wouldn't notice, and Linda's watch, the silver one with the thin band she wore to church every Sunday. She had pressed it into my hand on our wedding day, whispering that time was a promise we made to each other. Keeping that watch close to me now felt like carrying her strength, her reminder that loyalty should never be chained. The decision crystallized in that moment. To stay meant to continue being diminished, treated as an intruder in the very home I built. To leave meant losing the illusion of family, but keeping the dignity I had fought my whole life to preserve. And I knew survival without dignity wasn't survival at all. It was existence without honor. I would not end my days under someone else's boot. So, I began the quiet work of preparation. While Tyler left for work and Madison busied herself with errands, I moved deliberately, never rushing, never drawing suspicion. I cleared my nightstand of the only things that mattered: the safe key, the folder of papers, the photograph of Linda smiling in her garden. I tucked them into the suitcase along with a few clothes, folding each one as though nothing were unusual. Nora called in the afternoon. Her voice was brisk, efficient. "The buyers are ready. We can close earlier than planned if you want." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "As soon as possible." She told me the wire would go directly into the new account she had set up under my name. From there, I could transfer it overseas. My escape route was taking shape. That evening, Tyler came home in one of his moods. He slammed the refrigerator shut, grumbling about the electricity bill. Then he turned to me, beer in hand, and said, "You need to contribute more, Dad. You're not a guest here. You're living under my roof." The words almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded, hiding the flicker of satisfaction in my chest. He had no idea that the roof above him was already slipping out of his grasp. By the end of the month, his lectures would echo in an empty house that no longer belonged to him. Later that night, I zipped the suitcase closed and slid it back into the closet. It looked ordinary, harmless, just another piece of luggage, but I knew it held my future. I sat on the edge of my bed, the watch in my palm, the tick of its hand steady as my breath. I whispered to myself, the words quiet but final. It ends with me. Tomorrow, I walk free. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. If you're still watching and can feel how one decision can change everything forever, write number 5 in the comments so I know you understand the weight of this choice. The day of the closing came with no ceremony, no fanfare. Nora's office smelled faintly of coffee and ink, the kind of scent that clung to legal spaces. I sat across from her desk, pen in hand, signing papers with a steadiness I didn't feel. With each signature, I felt the chains I had been carrying slip away. The house that Tyler called his, the house I had built with decades of sweat and sacrifice, was no longer his illusion to cling to. It was mine to give, and I had given it away, to strangers who would never lock me in cages, who would never spit contempt in my direction. When Nora confirmed the wire transfer had gone through, I exhaled deeply. The funds now rested in an account only I controlled, secured further by arrangements she had set up overseas. For the first time in years, I was untouchable. My financial freedom was sealed. I shook her hand, thanked her for everything, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air feeling lighter than I had in decades. Back at the house, the atmosphere was almost absurd in its normalcy. Tyler sat at the table scrolling through his phone, and Madison was flipping through a catalog, pointing out countertops she thought would make the kitchen look fresh. Their voices bubbled with excitement about paint colors and open floor plans. I sat quietly at the edge of the room, listening without reaction. They planned for a future that had already vanished, and they didn't even know it. That irony was my private victory. I didn't gloat. I didn't announce what I'd done. Instead, I let my silence do the work. Over the years, I had learned that silence was heavier than shouting, sharper than any insult. Madison's eyes flicked toward me once or twice, suspicious, like she sensed something beneath my calm. But she said nothing. Tyler, blinded by arrogance, noticed nothing at all. That evening, a small twist of fate delivered the first crack in their world. Tyler had been rifling through the mail on the counter when he came across an envelope addressed to me from the escrow office. Carelessly, he tore it open, his eyes scanning the words. I watched from the kitchen doorway as his expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally panic. The color drained from his face. He read the letter again, his hands trembling. The words were clear enough. Confirmation of sale, transfer completed. He stormed down the hall, the letter crumpled in his fist. He shoved my door open without knocking, his voice cracking with fury. You sold the house? You can't do this. This is my home. I sat on the edge of my bed, the suitcase already packed and hidden in the closet. My voice was calm, steady. I did. The silence that followed was thicker than his anger. He blinked, his rage collapsing into something more fragile, fear. For the first time, he saw me not as the weak old man he could push around, but as the one holding the cards. The house he had lorded over me, the walls he believed were his fortress, had already slipped through his fingers. Why? He demanded, his voice breaking. How could you do this to me? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was the answer. In the kitchen, Madison's voice cut through the tension. What happened? Tyler stumbled out with the letter in hand, thrusting it toward her. She read quickly, her face tightening. Instead of sympathy, her glare turned on him. You did this, she snapped. You pushed too far. You treated him like dirt, and now we've lost everything. They argued then, harsh, biting words spilling into the room. Madison accused him of cruelty, of arrogance, of destroying the life they had built. Tyler shouted back, but his voice lacked conviction. The unity they once had, the shared smirks at my expense, cracked apart under the weight of reality. Their alliance shattered into blame and bitterness. I sat quietly in my chair, hands folded, watching the collapse unfold. I didn't need to interfere. The silence I carried was louder than anything I could have said. It echoed in their arguments, in the despair that filled the room, in the dawning realization that the future they thought was secure had already crumbled. The house was no longer theirs. It had never been theirs, and now they finally knew it. The house had become a battlefield by the following evening. Tyler stormed from room to room, his voice raw with rage. Madison shouted back at him, her words sharp as glass. They weren't united anymore. They were turning on each other, each blaming the other for the crumbling walls around them. I sat in the corner of the living room, quiet as stone, watching the chaos swirl past me like a storm I no longer lived inside. Tyler's footsteps thudded heavy against the floorboards. This is your fault, Madison hissed. You couldn't control your temper. You had to push him. You were fine with it when you laughed at him in the kennel, Tyler spat back. Don't pretend this is all me." Their words filled the air like smoke, choking and ugly. Yet inside me, there was only calm. No fury, no despair, just clarity. They had already lost. The deed was gone, the money was mine, and every scream they threw at each other only deepened my certainty that walking away was the only answer left. When the shouting dulled into bitter silence, I rose and walked to my room. My suitcase rested in the corner, zipped tight, holding everything that mattered: my passport, bank account details, copies of the deed, and Linda's watch. The envelope with the house keys lay on my desk, ready for Nora to collect when the buyers arrived. I traced the edges of the envelope with my finger, the weight of finality pressing against me. Tomorrow, I would vanish. But Tyler wasn't ready to surrender. Desperation drove him into my room that night, his eyes wide, his hands shaking as he shoved a pile of papers in front of me. "Sign these," he demanded, his voice cracked with panic. The papers were sloppy, riddled with errors, but I recognized what they were supposed to be: more forged legal documents, a desperate attempt to claw back what he had lost. "I'm not signing anything," I said evenly. "You have to," he shouted, his face twisted with fear. "You can't leave me with nothing. You owe me this." I didn't argue. Instead, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a flash drive. I slid it across the desk toward him. "Watch it." Confusion flickered across his face, but he plugged it into his laptop. Within seconds, the video appeared, the doorbell camera footage I had retrieved. His voice barking orders, his hand dragging me into the kennel, the sharp click of the lock, my voice pleading faintly in the background. His face drained of color. "Dad," he whispered, his words hollow. "That's enough to put you in prison," I said quietly. "You wanted control. Now you understand what control looks like." Madison appeared in the doorway, her eyes darting between the screen and me. "Oh my God," she muttered, and for once her voice held no mockery, just fear. Tyler stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. His excuses crumbled before they could leave his lips. The arrogance that had fueled him for so long was gone, stripped away in seconds. I stood, my hands steady at my sides. "This conversation is over." My voice was low but final. Neither of them tried to stop me as I closed the laptop and slipped the flash drive back into my pocket. That night, I made my final preparations. I called Nora to confirm the taxi for Dawn. I withdrew the last sum of cash from the ATM down the street and tucked it into a pouch at the bottom of my suitcase. I packed Linda's watch carefully between shirts, pressing my palm over it as though sealing a prayer. I wrote no letter. I left no explanation. Words would be wasted on people who never listened. Silence would be my answer, and silence would echo longer than any speech I could give. In the quiet hours after midnight, I sat on the edge of my bed, the house around me humming with uneasy silence. From down the hall, I could hear Tyler and Madison muttering, their voices sharp with blame, their marriage cracking beneath the weight of their fear. But none of it reached me anymore. I was already gone in my mind, already walking on a road that stretched far beyond this broken house. For one last time, I thought of Linda. I pictured her in her garden, the sun on her face, the silver watch glinting on her wrist. I felt the grief of leaving behind the dream we once shared, a home filled with love, not contempt. But the grief was clean, not heavy. It was release. As the night deepened, I placed the suitcase by the door. The keys rested in the envelope, the evidence in my pocket, and the weight of decades finally lifted from my chest. Tomorrow, when the sun rose, this house would belong to strangers, and Tyler would wake to a world he could no longer control. For me, there would be no more cages, no more chains, only freedom. If you're still watching and sensing how silence can be sharper than any shout, drop number 6 below to let me know you're here for the turning point. The alarm never rang that morning. I didn't need it. My body woke on its own, restless but calm, just before the first thin line of dawn touched the horizon. The house was hushed, only the faint snore of Tyler echoing down the hall. For once, the silence didn't feel heavy or suffocating. It felt like freedom waiting to be claimed. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the fragile stillness. My suitcase was already packed, resting by the front door like a loyal companion ready for the journey. On the small table beside it sat a sealed envelope addressed to Nora. Inside were the house keys. I pressed my palm over the envelope, a gesture of finality, before tucking it neatly into view where she would find it once the buyers arrived. Before leaving, I took one last walk through the house. The walls were familiar, but for the first time, they no longer carried power over me. I touched the frame of the front door, remembering the day Linda and I had first stepped through it, bright with hope. I brushed my hand along the kitchen table, where birthdays and holidays had once filled the air with laughter. I paused by Linda's old chair in the living room, empty for years but never forgotten. Instead of sadness, I felt closure. These objects no longer bound me. They were relics of a life that had already ended, and I was ready to stop clinging to them. The air outside was crisp, biting at my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. The taxi idled at the curb, its headlights cutting two sharp beams through the morning mist. I lifted the suitcase, set it gently in the trunk, and slid into the back seat. For a moment, I turned to glance at the house one final time. The windows reflected only the gray light of morning. No warmth, no welcome, just a hollow shell of what I once thought was family. I faced forward again and shut the door. As the taxi pulled away, the wheels crunching over gravel, I felt something unshackle within me. With every passing block, the weight that had pressed against my chest for years lifted a little more. By the time the house disappeared from sight, I was lighter than I had been in decades. Back inside, the unraveling began. Tyler stirred awake to the sound of voices, unfamiliar voices. He stumbled into the living room, confusion painted on his face, and froze. Movers in uniforms were carrying boxes through the front door, their boots leaving marks on the floor he once called his own. Behind them stood a young couple, papers in hand, smiling politely. "We're the new owners," the woman said when Tyler demanded answers. "We closed last week. The previous owner already moved out." His mouth opened, but no words came. His skin drained of color, as though someone had pulled the ground out from under him. "What do you mean?" "This is my house," he finally sputtered, his voice shrill with disbelief. The movers ignored him, walking past with furniture that no longer belonged to him. Madison appeared behind him, her face pale, her voice sharp. "What's happening?" Tyler shoved the papers toward her, his hands shaking. "He sold it. He sold everything out from under us." Her glare cut through him. "You did this. You and your cruelty. You couldn't leave well enough alone." Her words were venom. Years of frustration finally spilling out. The unity they had built on mocking me fractured in an instant. Their voices rose, clashing, throwing blame and anger in every direction. While they screamed, I sat miles away in the back of the taxi, watching the landscape roll by. The driver said nothing, and neither did I. I didn't need to. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to justify, to explain, to beg anyone to understand. The silence was enough. It was the silence of victory, of having turned their cruelty into their downfall. At the airport, the noise of travelers surged around me, but even that couldn't pierce the calm I carried. I checked in, passed through security, and waited at the gate with my suitcase at my feet. When my boarding group was called, I rose slowly, savoring the moment. Each step toward the plane was a step away from the cage, away from humiliation, away from Tyler's sneer. Hours later, as the engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky, I pressed my forehead to the cool window. The city below shrank into a blur of gray and green, disappearing into the clouds. Somewhere down there, my son was tearing through an empty house, screaming my name into walls that would never answer him. His calls to my phone would go unanswered. His desperate pleas to Nora would be met with polite reminders that everything was legal, binding, irreversible. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat, the hum of the plane steady beneath me. For the first time in years, I felt no fear of what tomorrow might bring. I carried only a suitcase, a watch, and the knowledge that I had taken back what was mine, not just the house, but my dignity, my freedom, my life. The house was never his, the control was never his, and now, at last, he knew it. The first days in the coastal town felt almost unreal, like waking from a long fever. The cottage I had rented was modest, 2 small rooms, a porch facing the ocean, and walls painted a soft cream that caught the morning light. It wasn't grand, not compared to the house I had poured my life into, but it was mine in every way that mattered. No one argued about how I lived here, no one banged on doors, no one locked me away. I discovered a new rhythm quickly. I could take long showers without anyone shouting through the door. I lingered under the water until steam filled the small bathroom and my skin turned pink. Every drop felt like an act of defiance against the memory of Tyler's voice. I cooked meals on my own time, sometimes simple eggs and toast, other times hearty stews that filled the little place with warmth. No one rolled their eyes at the smell, no one complained about the cost of groceries. Evenings became my favorite time. I'd carry a folding chair down to the shoreline, plant it in the sand, and watch the tide roll in. The ocean was endless, shifting colors with the sky, and the sound of the waves replaced the echo of slammed doors I used to endure. The locals greeted me kindly, a nod here, a smile there. At the cafe, the woman behind the counter learned how I took my coffee after just 3 visits. At the fish market, the vendor set aside the freshest catch with a quiet wink. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. I let them think of me as just another old man starting fresh. When I sat alone on the porch at night, I let my mind wander back to the life I had left. At first, grief welled up. I thought of little Tyler running barefoot in the yard, of the way Linda used to hum while she cooked. I thought of how hard I had worked to make sure my son never knew hunger, never knew cold, never felt abandoned. For a time, those memories hurt more than the cage ever had. They whispered the question, had it all been wasted? But the longer I stayed, the clearer it became. Sacrifice wasn't wasted because it went unappreciated. It was wasted when I allowed it to excuse cruelty. I had believed that blood ties were chains strong enough to hold family together, even when respect was gone. I had confused silence with weakness. What I finally understood was that silence could be strength when chosen, when wielded at the right time. My revenge wasn't the sale of the house. It wasn't the money in my account, or the look of horror on Tyler's face when the truth sank in. My real revenge was walking away, free, with dignity intact, while he remained trapped in the prison of his own arrogance. Sometimes I imagined what might be happening back in that mountain house. Perhaps movers had stripped it bare, carrying away furniture while Tyler shouted empty threats no one heeded. Maybe Madison had packed her bags, her patience burned out, leaving him to face the wreckage alone. Or maybe they stayed together, bound not by love, but by the shared ruin of their choices. I didn't linger on it. Their suffering was no longer my concern. I had carried their weight for decades. I wasn't carrying it anymore. One evening, sitting by the water, I turned Linda's watch over in my hand. The band was worn, the face scratched, but it ticked steadily, faithful as ever. I realized then that time had always been my ally. Every second I endured humiliation, I had been moving closer to this moment, the moment of freedom. She would have wanted this for me, not the cage, not the silence of defeat. She would have wanted me to walk away with my head held high. I began writing in a small journal I bought at the corner shop. Not a record of bitterness, but lessons I wished I had understood sooner. Families should protect, not imprison. Respect cannot be demanded, only nurtured. And dignity, once stripped away, must be reclaimed, even if it means walking alone. These truths came to me not as lofty philosophy, but as hard-won scars etched deep into memory. One night, as the sun dipped low and painted the sea in hues of fire and gold, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. True peace, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. I breathed in the salt air, slow and steady, and let the sound of the waves settle inside me. My story hadn't ended in bitterness, as I once feared. It had ended in freedom. Tyler may have believed he broke me the night he locked me in that cage, but the truth was different. That night didn't destroy me. It freed me. It showed me that once a parent stops fearing the loss of a child's love, they become unstoppable. I was no longer bound by his contempt, no longer chained by his arrogance. I had walked away, and in walking away, I had won. Now, with the ocean as my witness, I live without cages, without fear, without regret. The past is behind me, the future is mine to shape, and every sunrise over the water is a reminder that freedom is the greatest revenge of all. There comes a time in life when silence speaks louder than words, when dignity weighs more than loyalty, and when freedom becomes the only gift worth fighting for. Some stories are written in anger, filled with battles and noise, but the most profound endings are often the quiet ones, where the absence of chains says more than a lifetime of explanations. The truth is, betrayal does not always arrive as a stranger at the door. Sometimes it grows in familiar places, hidden beneath the comfort of blood ties and the illusion of love. When trust is broken, when respect is stripped away, the wound cuts deeper than any physical harm. Yet it is in those very wounds that resilience is born. The human spirit learns that to survive is not enough. One must also preserve dignity. To endure humiliation without rising again is to accept a life less than living. Life has a way of testing us in places we least expect. Years of sacrifice can vanish in a single moment of cruelty. Years of loyalty can crumble beneath the weight of selfishness. And yet, even in the darkest hours, there is a choice: to remain trapped by the pain inflicted by others, or to step beyond it, carrying only the lessons forward. Choosing the latter does not erase the scars, but it transforms them into reminders of strength, proof that one can walk away from the very things meant to break them. True freedom often comes at the cost of letting go. It means abandoning the illusion that others will change simply because they should, releasing the expectation that love will be returned in equal measure, and accepting that some bonds cannot be repaired. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that clinging to what hurts only prolongs suffering, while letting go creates space for peace. There is a philosophy carved quietly into the bones of experience. Respect is never something to be begged for, and love is not meant to imprison. When either becomes conditional, manipulative, or cruel, the responsibility shifts inward. The responsibility becomes reclaiming one's worth, choosing solitude over servitude, silence over endless pleading. That choice, though painful, is what transforms survival into living. Every ending carries with it a beginning. To walk away is not to lose everything. It is to shed what was never truly yours. Walls crumble, doors close, and familiar rooms fall silent, but beyond them, a new horizon waits. There is life outside of betrayal, a life richer than control, freer than bitterness, and stronger than regret. Freedom is not found in possession or revenge alone, but in the decision to no longer allow others to define your value. In that decision lies the quiet power of transformation. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not demand applause. It simply exists, steady and unshakable, like the tide rolling against the shore. And once found, it cannot be taken away again. The lesson is clear. Dignity is not a gift granted by others. It is a birthright, something to be defended fiercely, even when it means standing alone. Betrayal may scar, but it also teaches. It strips illusions and reveals the core of who we are when everything else falls away. And in that revelation comes the greatest truth, that peace is possible, even after cruelty, even after loss. So, the story does not end with bitterness, but with freedom. It ends with the reminder that life's worth is not measured by who stands beside you, but by how steadfastly you honor yourself. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not found in confrontation, but in the silence of walking away, carrying only what truly matters: self-respect, peace, and the courage to begin again. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage. It's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.